Dear Professor Fearon, welcome on NaspRead. Over the last decade, the world has seen the rise of wars between states or the threats of wars between states. And while most of them seem to stem from territorial disputes, I'm thinking about the Russia-Ukraine situation or the China-Taiwan tension. You believe that the real issue at stake is the fundamental divide between democracies and dictatorships. Why is it so?
Both are very important. And I guess I'd refer not just to territorial disputes, but cases where there are conflicting nationalist claims on territory in particular. There are many cases where there's like a minor disagreement about where the border is, but it doesn't involve in any deep or central way one or the other country's sense of what is intrinsically homeland in a fundamental way. And it's some of those cases that are particularly and somewhat obviously drivers of interstate conflict, as both the Russia-Ukraine and the PRC-Taiwan cases indicate. But yeah, I also think that there's another thing going on, as it were, which is a democracy autocracy driver of conflict. I'm stressing that in part because it's what I think is at least part of a solution to something of a puzzle about why we see significant interstate frictions in some cases, with risk of war or arms racing and so on, in a world where, in contrast to especially, say, the pre-1945 world, it's extremely difficult to imagine how major powers could like invade and take over each other anymore. So there was a view after the end of the Cold War, the communists, perhaps especially in Europe, but not only there, that sort of major power interstate military conflict was just a thing of the past. From that perspective, it's kind of surprising in some ways that it's come back. I think that view was not crazy. There are a lot of reasons to wonder, like, why would US and China have anything really particularly to fight over, for example? And there, I think that part of the answer to the puzzle is this democracy autocracy thing, where autocratic regimes are almost invariably extremely concerned about domestic rebellion or coups. That's by far the most likely threat to continued rule of an autocrat. And they realize that democracies, in particular, militarily and economically powerful democracies like the US and European Union states, if there was a domestic uprising, say large protests in the capital city, would be inclined to favor that and possibly support it. I think that democracies have they shouldn't have foreign policies that amount to like helping keep autocrats in power. So that's just a function of what I would say is good preferences on the part of democracies, but it creates this problem of insecurity, or it adds to the insecurity of autocratic leaders and can lead them to want to pursue foreign policies which are defensive, or they see as defensive in light of this regime threat.
What is it that truly frightens a dictator? Is that something that a democracy could do or does, or is it just the fact that a democracy exists? And thus, are our countries in danger as democracies?
I think it's both. I think there's just kind of an intrinsic threat, as it were, that democracies pose to autocracies because they provide kind of an example and a kind of script for an alternative to the autocrat's system. And this has been true for a long time, since the French Revolution. So there is partly an intrinsic element, and that's connected also to what I was just mentioning about what could democracies, or say, could the US say, like, well, our policy is if there's a domestic uprising in, say, North Korea, we'll help Kim Jong-un put it down. I can't see that, and I wouldn't recommend it as a foreign policy. So, because I think it's, the North Korean regime, I think, is a terrible regime, and that, a policy of favoring in such a circumstance its overthrow would be good. Generally speaking, yeah, that would be a good thing to do. And given that known preference by Kim Jong-un, he's got all kinds of reasons to say, acquire, build nuclear weapons and do things that make that more dangerous or risky in the event that something like that occurred.
What about the current situation in Russia and Ukraine? Do you think there is a chance for peace on the horizon?
It's not looking very good right now. There's different ways peace could come about. One would be some kind of agreement. Another would be that the Ukrainian military ceases to be able to fight, and the country is, or a very large part of it is taken over by Russia. I don't see that as very likely to create a good peace at all. There will be terrible violence and repression and retribution killing in the areas newly controlled by Russian forces, as well as simply, forcible suppression of national self-determination by Russia over Ukrainians. There's a chance that the Ukrainians can stabilize their front lines, and I think that's the key question right now. Can they kind of stabilize the front lines? And if they can, I think there's, various ways you could see pauses that would temporarily stop the killing, but I fear that, in the longer run, that would almost surely be just a prelude to rearmament, which could either go in the way of renewed war or, in the better case, stable deterrence by Ukraine of continued fighting by Russia.
And how does the situation in Syria enter this scenario?
I don't know that it affects it all that much. I mean, I'd say, harking back to what we were talking about a minute ago, it's a good example of you asked, what do autocrats fear? That's the kind of thing they fear, is like a sudden collapse, which, caught a lot of people by surprise. I don't know how much it caught the regime by surprise. I'm sure they saw a lot of indications of trouble, but that I think that's a good example of what autocratic regimes and their leaders worry about a great deal.